This happened a few years ago, but I remember every moment as if it happened yesterday. I lived in a small town where everyone knew each other, and every summer my friends and I gathered at my house. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until one evening when we began to hear strange noises on the roof. We were sitting in the room watching movies and laughing loudly. Outside it was getting dark, and evening was slowly turning into night. Suddenly we heard dull thumps. They came from above, rhythmically, as if someone were wandering on the roof. At first we thought it was the wind or just the old house creaking, but the sounds became more pronounced. Maybe it's just a cat, my friend Kevin suggested, glancing quickly out the window. A cat on the roof? Amy scoffed, her face showing doubt. Come on, Kevin. We tried to ignore the sounds, but they kept coming. Each time a thump echoed, silence filled the room, and we exchanged glances, unsure of what to think. Soon, anxiety gripped me. I stood up and went to the window to look at the roof, but all I saw was darkness. Maybe someone got stuck up there, Lisa proposed. We should check it out. I didn't want to do that, but someone had already grabbed a flashlight and was urging the rest of us. We all knew it was foolish, but we were drawn to the danger. No matter how hard we tried to calm ourselves, the feeling of dread kept rising. Outside, the night air was cool as we climbed the stairs to the attic, where there was access to the roof. Thankfully, we had a hatch. My legs trembled, and I sensed that this wasn't quite normal. We slowly ascended, and I began to hear the sounds again. Now they sounded closer, as if someone were right above us. On the roof, it was dark, and the beam of the flashlight only highlighted that darkness. We began to cautiously survey the area, but found nothing. Instead, the strange noises suddenly stopped, and complete silence descended. The thumping was replaced by something more sinister, soft rustling, as if someone were dragging something. Let's go back, Amy suggested, but I felt that descending was too risky. Something was wrong, and I couldn't explain what. Suddenly, the flashlight illuminated something at the edge of the roof. We all froze. In the beam of light, we saw something that made our hearts race. A silhouette that was slowly moving toward us. I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't a person, nor was it an animal. It was too tall, too thin, with long limbs and a contorted body. We stood frozen in horror. What is that? Lisa whispered. I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to scream, but my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. The figure took a step forward, and at that moment, I felt a paralyzing fear wash over me. I knew I had to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Suddenly, it leaned toward us, and I saw its face, pale, with long black hair hiding its eyes. In that moment, I realized that what was on the roof was not just a scared creature, but something malevolent. We turned and ran back to the hatch, but I could hear it following us. The sound of its steps echoed in my ears. As we descended, we nearly fell. I felt someone grab my shoulder. It was Kevin, pulling me along toward the exit. We burst outside and slammed the door behind us, trying to catch our breath. Outside, it was quiet, but the silence felt ominous. We stepped away from the house, exchanging glances, unsure of what to do next. We couldn't understand what it was or how it could have gotten on the roof. The night passed in anxious silence. I couldn't sleep, thinking about what had happened. In the morning, we returned to the roof, but found nothing. No tracks, no evidence. As if it had all been a nightmare. A few days after the incident, I noticed I started avoiding that place. Every night, I had nightmares. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't real, that we had just worked ourselves up. But whenever I looked at the roof, the feeling of dread always returned. Weeks passed, and one day I came home with friends, and while climbing to the attic, I heard the familiar sounds again. They were just as they had been that night. My heart raced, and I felt the wave of fear wash over me once more. This time, I didn't want to go back to the roof. I knew I didn't want to see what I had seen before. Instead, I closed the attic and didn't go back for several months. But then something even stranger began. I started to notice that someone was watching me. In the evenings, when I went out for a walk, it felt like a shadow was following my every step. Every rustle made me turn around, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't shake that feeling. I didn't share my fears with my friends. They wouldn't understand. I began to lock windows and doors when night fell. And then, one night, I had a nightmare in which that figure appeared again. But this time it was closer, and I felt its cold breath on my face. Many days passed since then, but the fear never left me. I began to notice that something lurked nearby. I tried to live a normal life, but in the evenings when silence fell, it would wash over me again. I heard rustling sounds, looked out the window, waiting to see that silhouette. Months went by, and I finally decided I had to tell my friends. One evening, we gathered at my house, and I finally shared my story. Surprisingly, they understood. They had also experienced something similar. Fear at night, the feeling of being watched. The next morning, we decided to go back up to the roof. This time, there were more of us, and maybe that's why I felt a bit more confident. We took flashlights again and began to inspect the area. The sounds seemed to have disappeared, but the atmosphere was tense. We approached the edge of the roof and looked down, but found nothing. Suddenly, one of our friends, Paul, screamed. He pointed at something below. We all looked and saw that in the backyard, against the darkness, someone was standing. It looked like that figure again, but now we could see it more clearly. It was still tall and thin, but now it was staring right at us. We froze in horror. I didn't know what to do. I felt my blood run cold and my body trembled. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Finally, it turned and vanished into the darkness. We descended from the roof, but everything changed from that day. I could no longer stay in that house. We all decided to spend the night at one of our friends' places. But even then, I knew that fear would never leave me. Every time I heard rustling sounds, it felt like that thing was returning. And I realized that perhaps this was not just a figure on the roof, but something that would haunt me for the rest of my life.